Well, welcome everyone, and thanks to Ars Electronica for the opportunity to contribute this discussion. And I'd like to thank you, the artists, Katherine Melançon, Moritz Wehrmann, and George Fok, for taking the time to discuss their work, which is part of the exhibition Emergence and Convergence, currently on view at PHI Centre in Montreal. My name is Cheryl Sim, and I'm the curator and managing director of the Centre's sister organization, the PHI Foundation for Contemporary Art, and I had the pleasure and privilege of being part of the curatorial team behind this exhibition. So hello to all three of you.
Hi.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that PHI Centre is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And I'd like to thank Wahiasan Xian Whitebean for the writing of this acknowledgement. So the way that the panel is going to work is that we're going to start with a question that I've prepared for each of you on your respective works, and then we're going to open up the conversation between us all with one or two questions that we can all respond to and discuss. But just before we start, I thought I'd provide context for the conversation and share a very abbreviated version of the thematic concept that informs the exhibition. Is that cool? Okay, so Emergence and Convergence brings together works that contemplate the intersections of the self, the natural world, and technology. As our experience with confinement has forced us to reevaluate our priorities and values as a global community, this exhibition puts the emphasis on how this knowledge contributes to an evolved state of awareness of the world we live in. That's the basic premise of the exhibition that brings your works together, along with the works of Danielle Corbet, Sabrina Raté, Oliver Eliasson, and Armando Kerwin and Azuma Makoto. So let's start with you, Katherine. I've had the privilege of following your work for a few years now, and the questions it explores immediately sprang to mind for the thematic of this show. We present several works from your series, État de matière, or the state of matter, or material, since there's a nuance in the word matière. And these works include large-scale prints and video works that interpret local flora through a series of digital processes that alter their representation. And the uncanny effect is that even in the prints, these still life works appear to be in a constant state of mutability and evolution. Can you talk about the imperatives behind this particular body of work, about the questions which led you to engage with these materials, tools, and processes? In particular, your abandonment of control in this process. Certainly the pandemic has forced us certainly to surrender controls in many ways.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. I visited Ars Electronica once, and you know it's such a wonderful experience. So it's nice to take part in this virtual way. Thanks for your question. So I think the questions that first led me to this kind of work are not the questions that are keeping me interested in making this work evolve. But when I first started, that was around 2000 actually, exploring this body of work, I was literally interested in exploring this very basic home tool that we all have around, which is the scanner, the flatbed scanner. And I think I wasn't aware of it, but I was sort of interested in this idea of bridging the gap between nature and culture. So really bringing nature straight to the scanner. So having nature meeting face to face with technology. Can you still hear me? Because it's frozen on my side.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Um, the idea was to stop using technology as something that's really precious and delicate, and we need to be careful with it. So I was laying down tomatoes and fish and meat. So I really wanted to confront like the two opposite together. But I think nowadays we're beyond that. We're beyond this dichotomy, and we're really starting to think about our relationship to all living things, such as flora and animals. So I think that my work nowadays is more interested in flattening the hierarchy between all living beings to kind of rethink the way we live and we organize ourselves. But to come back to the work that I'm showing, I think also the idea of using the scanner was to also pervert its usage. So when you start using a scanner, the app will tell you like, oh, don't forget, close the top. And that's, you know, I'm not doing that. The scanner doesn't like it. So it shows all these glitch in the image because I'm using it in a way that is not supposed to. And I think that's part of art history as well, like using the tools and the materials around us in just a different way, and just being creative with what is around us. So I am interested in more sophisticated technologies, but I'm also interested in these very approachable, what's around us technologies. And I think we'll maybe talk about this later, but this is the challenge in technologies. There's such a range, and there's some of them are accessible, obsolete, some of them are not, or are so sophisticated that it's kind of a challenge to keep up. So that's what I like with the scanner. It's very simple. It's also a sort of performance because I move when I scan the objects. So that's why there's this kind of lack of information at some point in the image. But I like this moment of performance with the tool where there's a kind of dance, and that's when the image is created. That's actually the moment where the work is created for me. It's this dance with the light that's passing through the scanner. So to speak of control, I think that's the magic of it, is like you don't necessarily control everything. Well, at least with this method, because I don't know with all digital tools, but this, because I'm not using it in the way you're supposed to, the scanner reacts. So he's actually active in the making of the work. So I'm allowing the tool to imprint the material that is created from our kind of co-creative process. And I like that because it keeps it like surprising, because every time we do something together, I don't exactly know what's gonna come out of it. So it keeps it always surprising and interesting. And yeah, I think control is a bit of an illusion, actually. And I think the virus is reminding us of that. I think as human, we're a bit like an anxious being, and we're trying to control, to maybe manage this kind of anxiety that is within us. But I think that letting go of that anxiety and maybe seeing what happens when we let go of control can be very interesting and actually very transformative.
I couldn't agree more. And I really like, sort of this idea of addressing hierarchies and a kind of post-human approach to address, sort of the age-old centrality, of the human within the environment. I didn't know about the dance. It's a whole other area, I think, that maybe you want to you want to explore.
Thank you.
But yes, absolutely. You know, sort of letting go of what and sort of letting go of anxiety about what we don't know is part of a kind of active practice, right? Um, to release oneself or to be free, to transcend, you know, as in through a meditative practice, for example. And that might, you know, tie well in with George's project as well. But let's pivot to you, Moritz. Your work, Alter Ego, is a participatory work that consists of stroboscopic light and a special pane of glass. The work invites two people to stand facing each other on opposite sides of the glass, and the flashing light creates an effect whereby your face is cast onto the body of the person across from you and vice versa. The effect is that of a simultaneous estrangement from your own body, and yet a connection with the other person seems to take place. Tell us more about the philosophical questions that you're exploring that prompted you to make this work. And I'm particularly interested to know if and how confinement might have brought some of these questions into sharper view.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to this panel, and I'm glad that I can maybe talk a little bit about the work, which also is a couple of years old. It started in 2010, and it actually didn't really start with a philosophical question, but much more with a very, very personal question of how communication works. And I was reading about mirror neurons at that time. Was a discovery by Giacomo Rizzolatti in Italy. And it stated that if we see somebody acting or doing something, that our brain kind of does the same thing in the brain areas. And I was curious how to, or whether there is any way to make that graspable, this effects of mirroring each other in communication. And in the end, I think the work does more than just questioning this question, but raises much more other questions about the relationship of us humans with each other. And I think the work somehow disrupts our everyday experience of the otherness and the selfness, which is something very new to kids. That's, I think, is the reason why kids are usually very happy with the installation and are never afraid. For them, it's quite normal to interact, and they also see the strange effects, but they're never frightened, while some grown-ups with a very stable and fixed self-image have troubles seeing themselves mapped onto somebody else, and vice versa. So I think many of the philosophical questions also arise when you're actually in it, and it's so difficult to describe what actually happens, because I think for me, in many of my works, it's quite important to be in a real setting or in the real physical space and a real scenery. And I think especially with the confinement at the moment, it's quite interesting that all this is missing or missed so much by so many people, that people are really they wish so much to actually meet in physical spaces. To just go out for dinner suddenly becomes an event.
Yes.
And I think in terms of this, I think the installation is maybe or gained some more importance in a way, or is making that more visible or graspable, that this physical interaction is actually something very, very important to us. And then I also thought that, or I think that if you see the confinement that happens in the installation itself, there's also a certain way of confinement, because there you realize that you're kind of confined to the other, or the confinement that you establish with your body. You know that it is usually, you know, the mirror image that's you and your body is suddenly disrupted, and this confinement between me and you doesn't work anymore in a way. So, or at least it's distorted. And yeah, that's
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, I was wondering about how, I mean, when I experienced the work, I was with someone I knew. It was actually, you know, our founder director. And so that was sort of an interesting, you know, sort of power relationship as well that you've become aware of. But what about when people don't know each other, and what does that do?
Oh, that's quite interesting. That's also because why I like so much being with the installation, just listening to people. And as I said before, usually with kids, it's fine. They are not that much disturbed. They are happy seeing other people, and everything is kind of strange. And with people who know each other very well, or in general, when people see each other in the installation, what they often realize, and what you would not find always very objective, is that they say something like, ah, yeah, we look very similar. And in a way, of course, all humans look very similar, and there are bounds between us which we are usually not that aware of. And then it also depends on how open people are. There's sometimes people who just see somebody else, and it's kind of an intimate experience, because yeah, it's your self-image, and many people are so much fixed on their self-image. So it's kind of a disruption of the personal space as well, and they often react frightened, or they start laughing. And I mean, laughing is also often a way of uncertainty. There's definitely a huge amount of uncertainty that happens, but it's the difference of how to react to it, I think, that makes it interesting. Seeing different people.
A final thought I had was around the duration, because the initial effect and the discomfort or the laughter, which is, as you say, a kind of way of addressing a discomfort, you know, with what you're experiencing. I feel like it's a really good idea that people stay. You know, it's like, okay, and then, you know, and then I'm out of there. But if they stayed for like 5 minutes, say, like, what would the range sort of emotion and cognition be, and what would you experience after, on the other side of that, you know, more durational time? You know, just before we move on to George, how long have people been able to sustain that experience in your, you know, with what you've seen?
That's as different as people are. So there were some people at Ars Electronica last year which really wanted to stay for a quarter or something like that, which is rather unusual, I would say. But
like 15 minutes? Sorry, like 15 minutes long?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was surprisingly long. Usually, I mean, it's also this exhibition context, and it depends whether there's people lining up and queuing. That also creates another effect on it. But I think if you really have the chance to take your time, I think it's what you say. If you really let go and start playing a little bit longer, that's very how to say that.
really takes you on a journey, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to George. I've also had the privilege of seeing you evolve as an artist from filmmaking and now video installation, and you created a new immersive work for this exhibition called Seeking Stillness. It's a monolithic video projection that beams from the height of the ceiling. It blows all the way down the wall and then like swishes along the floor of the entire space. Visitors are invited to sit or lie down on the floor where they're completely bathed in light, images, and there's also an immersive sound composition. As a durational work, it's like about 30 minutes. We're compelled to let go and to let it happen. I think that's something that is a very sort of a red thread that brings all your works together. Can you share the concerns that motivated you to make this work? The title prompts us to consider the speed at which we've been living our lives up until now, and certainly, you know, this experience with the pandemic has forced us to slow down.
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. Yeah, to go back to the inspiration of the project, it's like, I think around 2 years ago, I'm already, like a few years ago, I already started very interested in like how to research on how technology impact people, and as inspiration for my work in a positive and negative way. And then I think 2 years ago, there's huge topic on the impact of social media. They had Cambridge Analytica, and there's a conference about time well spent, and there's an exponential discussion about what is the impact of social media on people, what connectivity do to people. And I think that from then to now, even though there's a lot of discussion, it haven't slowed down. As a matter of fact, it kind of actually grew even more. So it's a bit of a concern, like how wired we are. When I have this opportunity being talked about, like being kind of like a confinement commission to build this work or to finish this work, is always thinking about how can, as an artist, contribute like an alternative experience or provide something a little bit different to create some kind of experience for people to meditate, to contemplate, a place for introspection, to slow down the notion of time in comparison with the current nowadays. And I asked myself why I'm interested in that. And I think it came from a lot of my interest in religious architecture, the interior, also my place of worship. And when I travel, usually I like to go to visit churches in different countries. And I find it very intriguing, like in places in Italy or in Greece, they have very elaborate churches, and places in Iceland, they're very minimalistic, almost like nothing kind of thing. But it's interesting to look at these kind of places because in today's secular world, it's still very relevant. People still want to go there to sit down to experience it. And I realized something very interesting, that probably the church is one of the first immersive experience that we created. Because when you go in, you're surrounded by this awesome mega space, and then really like more than usual ceiling heights. And then you're surrounded by all kinds of decorated art and ornament. And in front you have this massive altarpiece, which you're supposed to focus on. And often it's very narrative, there's story in there. And then not only that, it often companioned with sermon or speech or prayers. And then afterward, you have this massive organ, like you have sound that shower to you from the top and the feel of the whole space. So that creates some kind of awesomeness of, that experience is something that I'm very captivated and see how can we brought it to the 21st century in the museum setting, in the gallery setting, without the burden of this huge religious notion, but keep that meditative and introspective side of it and bring it to the audience. So that's the intention of the work. And also the other thing is that church experience is always passive. You'll be invited to sit down to just be still and observe, rather than rather than an active experience that constantly moving. Because I see a lot of immersive work, people running around, moving their hand, trying to create pattern, but that's not the intention of this work. This work wants you to really slow down, to observe it, and to be part of it as a collective experience. I was reading a little bit something about the syncing of the brain, and I don't know whether it's 100% true, but like when you go to a concert, people observe something together. Like all of a sudden you hear a very fast song, and the next song, the singer come up with a one piano or guitar, and then you sing. Everybody stop all of a sudden, quiet, observing that moment, and there's some kind of very interesting experience that everybody's like spring singing together, experience that. So I was attempting to using my work to see whether I can create that kind of calmness experience to connect people together. It's an individual experience at the same time. It's like a communal experience at the same time. Yeah. So that's basically the about the inspiration of the format. But maybe talking about in terms of the context, because it's talking about the notion of time, right? Because when you have a lot of things going in your life, you feel the time pass really, really fast. But then when you're in different places, like let's say you're taking a hike or you're doing your perception of time change. So I'm interested in reading, like people who study about the notion of time. There's physicists like Carlos Raffaelli talking about time is relative in different parts of the, like very in minor setting, outside of in different part of the universe, the sense of time is different. I can't really articulate it, but the time is not a parallel experience. And then the theologian, they also talk about the notion of time very different. And then you read about Marcel Proust, talk about the loss of time that he was talking about notions. So that's actually the perception of time varies. So I think that's the intention. So in that, hopefully to play with the notion of time to induce that you're thinking that, wow, okay, there's things that are more significant than ourselves. And that stillness, the calmness you're talking about, or the absolute, or the constant. And in that sense, when you recognize that you're not that significant, or you at all in the grand scheme of things, actually you bring you some kind of freedom. You know? So yeah, I hope I explained the work well in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you blew my mind a little in regards to the church as like one of these original immersive experiences. And of course, like I think of video artists like Bill Viola, you know, when I think about the sort of the transcendence, you know, from the self, and also this kind of experience with an immersive space that brings you in touch with things that are beyond yourself, beyond sort of the ego self, if you will, and the idea of it being like thinking about the rock show, for example, like the concert experience. I mean, that is absolutely a kind of modern day, you know, quote unquote religious experience where, you know, we have a great deal of people coming together to connect. And so what I've, you know, in having this conversation with all three of you, I mean, there are incredible connections left, right, and center. I mean, it's amazing to see how you are all sort of, you know, digging into the ideas of transcendence very, very generally through encounters, which allow us in many ways to detach, right, from kind of the earthly self, from the fixed self, from our relationship on the earth with plants and animals, and then with a kind of sense of a spiritual self. I'm like absolutely delighted, you know, to have this experience where I'm like getting all of this incredible food from you. So now that we have a kind of a primer a little bit on each of your works, I'd love to propose a couple of kind of big questions and open up the conversation amongst all four of us. You each question the state of the human condition and its relationship with a hyper-technologized world. And maybe, in Moritz, in your case, also with a kind of a world that is, you know, sort of mediated through bodies and through sort of neurological experiences. So how do you regard technology and its role in the creation of art? I mean, I think I have a little bit of that, but I'd love to hear us all talk to each other in this way. Is it a tool like any other? Does working with electronic or digital technologies present any limitations? And I think, Katherine, you were very good at talking about how artists subvert the use of technologies to get them to move and do beyond what they were originally intended for. And are there properties within electronic or digital technologies themselves that you harness as a way to investigate your questions? And what I mean by that is, conceptually, are you using specific materials and tools because of their nature and what that does for your work? Or, I mean, and they can just be tools, you know, just a means to an end as well. Who would like to jump in on that? Maybe Katherine, you know, you talked a lot about the, you know, sort of the happenstance, you know, sort of the creative possibilities of the unknown through the use of the flatbed scanner. And I know you use many other tools, digital tools as well. So how do you feel about these things?
Yeah, I think technology is like, it's a language, it's a tool, it's a material. So it's kind of everything at the same time. I think we can say the same maybe of more traditional art materials, because they all resist in some ways. They all have an agency. So this comes back to what I'm interested now is how things and living beings act and have an agency, and we're not the only one having the power or having an effect on what surrounds us. So I think it's technology is fascinating and frustrating and also very complex. So I think it has maybe a more diverse way of resisting to us. I think because there's coding as well. There's like, it's so diverse, complex, and deep, and it evolves as well. So I'm currently using scanners, but there's so many new, you know, technologies coming out all the time, which is also very stimulating. But also can be a bit like frustrating. I remember the artist Scanning what he's talking about, you know, using Second Life, and each time there's a new version, she needs to adapt to it, and that's quite something. When you use a pen, the pen is a pen. You know, we're not reinventing the pen every nowadays. So this is a challenge with technologies, and I was also speaking of access earlier, where I like to be able to use it easily, and with my new projects I'm using sensors and Arduino and other kind of technologies, but then you need a team, so it creates a complexier way of making work, and you don't always have the funding or the facilities or the access. So it's complex, but it's also very, very interesting, and you know, it's, at first I got interested in technologies because it was new. Like, there was so many possibilities, and there are still so many possibilities, and it's probably an endless thing. So it's kind of overwhelming, but it's also very attractive. So, you know, you want to explore these new tools, and you want to discover what you can do with those, and it's like they're having you practice progress with the new possibilities. So it's yeah, it's very challenging and rewarding at the same time.
It's almost like limitations become a kind of new material to you, or I should rephrase that. Limitations have always been part of the artistic process and what it affects outcomes and inspires new possibilities. But it and that becomes no exception with electronic or digital technologies or tools.
Exactly. Probably speeding up, actually.
Mhm.
How about you, Moritz? I'm curious to know about how maybe the research that you had to embark on to, assemble the materials that you did for your work, and I guess your general feelings about technologies as artistic tools.
Yeah, I think my work is also maybe interesting in terms of technology because it's exactly at the edge of analog and digital technology. Because we are not really able to perceive anything digital. Digital is something that in the first place is strange to us, and that's also why it's interesting for artists to work with, because it's kind of this hidden almost magic thing behind devices and all kind of technologies that we are using every day. And I think many artists are a bit like kids when they break up their electronic devices to figure out how it actually works. And I think that's also kind of the importance why artists should do digital technology art, because the consumer market is kind of trying to close everything, to make everything slick and closed and intuitive. And the role of the artist is kind of messing with this too easy technology that's all around us. And yeah, I think in general, I like disturbance or disturbing things, or at least making people aware of that the normal is also a creation. And I think also what is interesting in terms of technology is that technology is very old. Building a house is kind of based on technology, but the digital technology is so interesting because there's so many things behind a network that we can't see. At the same time, a network that if you learn a little bit how it works, you can control in a way that you can make shapes so perfectly round that you could never do in physical space or something like that. Or I think there's a very interesting relationship between these new technologies and the old technologies. And I think many of the artists who work on this boundary are exactly interested in this break between the physical analog and the digital magic world.
Yeah, well said. I'm glad that you brought up the idea of what the consumer market, sort of aims to do in kind of keeping these things sort of hermetically sealed, and that it's artists who are always going to like bust open that box, and that you think of these things too as kind of magical, and that there's an actual spirit in there is sort of really interesting as well. George, your thoughts?
I think Katherine and Moritz covered quite a bit what I have to say, but maybe I can bring a little bit. I love technology. At the same time, even though I being critical about it, and I think I won't be an artist if these technology weren't available. It allows me to do what I do, say what I wanted to say. Without that, it's probably very difficult to think about the last few pieces of work I do. It's related with archival footage, whatever, and even the process of researching, going through looking for archival footage or historical footage or doing research. Right now, because of this connectivity, because of YouTube, because of archive, because of all kinds of things, you can see range of historical things. And the amount of knowledge and material that you can access is so massive. So I think it's a positive thing. And without it, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do the work I'm going to do. And I like talk about this current piece of work. I was just learning new software. At the same time, like I was picking up, learning, trying to do 3D software and realized, okay, the frustration came is the learning curve is really, really deep. So as an artist, if you're doing technology, you constantly have to learn and upgrade yourself. And the amount of time to invest is quite a bit before you get to do what you have to do, before you're able to be comfortable using it to do what you have to do. But at the same time, it opens such a wild flexibility, and it forces you to learn different things. Like when doing this piece, you have to learn 3D, and within 3D software, it's not just a visual experience. You understand 3D space, you understand how coding and software work to synthesize texture. And some part of it involves mathematics to create the light bursts and that kind of thing. So I have to go back to understand, okay, how this advanced math use tangent, cosine, how this thing work, and I have to go back to understand the calculation of that. So sometimes it could be quite frustrating, but at the same time, you know, I don't want to fight against it. I wanted to use to the advantage of that. I know there's dangers of that. I know that the dangers is one of the dangers of it is, or the downside of it is, it quite obvious, especially in the digital world, is it creates similar work because people using similar tools, similar software, similar plugin, and
Right.
often you see, especially in digital art, there's a lot of similarities. So it's quite important not to be fetishized by the two, rather than focus what you have to say. And that's a challenge. I think a lot of digital work is, yeah. And it's easy to be copied. It's, wow, this is cool, this is hip. And then lots of people will look for what software, what to do it. And then it's very easy to be duplicated. And then, so that's the thing. So it go back to the thing that rather than the two, it's important that what you want to say with these tools, you know, with this this medium,
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that's you know, sort of as a curator and also as an artist myself, I find that you know, one must always question oneself about you know, what is the best way to say that you want what you want to say? What is the best medium through which to convey those questions? And so really what it comes down to is, what is my question? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, the tools and media sort of issue from those answers. And the answers may never come. It's just part of this ongoing investigation. Mm-hmm. Well, it leads me to my next question, which is more about the relationship with technology and, you know, sort of, I guess, the human, and maybe we can extend that out so that we are conscious of, you know, the never-ending desire to put human at the center of things. And this question is like perennial. We're not going to answer it. I think it's something we have to ask ourselves all the time. And I'm going to contextualize the question with this series of lectures by Ursula Franklin. She's this physicist, and in 1989, she gave a series of lectures called The Real World of Technology. They were these Massey lectures that were broadcast on the CBC here in Canada. And in the lecture, she questions how technologies, you know, have permeated our everyday lives. And she claims that over time, we have become increasingly blind to the hegemonic quality of these systems. I would say, sort of in a general sense, perhaps not you three, which have led to us becoming increasingly blind and that perhaps technologies have contributed to a possible deterioration of human relationships, the quality of life, and the natural environment. What do you think of this? What major impacts have technologies, be they electronic, digital, what have they had on this human psyche? And I'm curious to know if you think that they have disciplined us, and how, with the understanding that technologies do delineate and I guess articulate how to do things, how not to do things, what's the right way to do things, and if we're doing it or not doing it, is that a form of discipline, you know, that the technologies impose on, you know, the human psyche and the body? I throw it out to you. It's my gift to you.
Serious, my goodness.
Really light question.
You know.
I think, yeah, it's, as you said, I think we can't fully answer that, but I think it's like I have a hate and love relationship to it, because for instance, we just take like the access to searching online about things that interests us, this access to information, to sharing, to discussing with strangers, connecting to people. My mother is on Facebook. She has more friends than me, and she speaks about spirituality with people around the world. I mean, this is amazing. She's like in North Quebec in a little, you know, house in the countryside, and she's connecting with the world. Like, it's amazing. Like, and I think you know, like the interactivity, what it brings to artworks as well, that being able to be involved in the artwork, to find meaning through gestures and actions, and being part of the work, I think it adds so much to the possibilities of discussing and exchanging. So yeah, and we all know what, you know, the dark side of technologies are. So it's sort of like a very polarized a topic, I think, and yeah, we just need to, I think, become better humans, so we make a better use of it. I think the human is always a problem behind a problem.
Moritz, I feel like you have a research creation practice, you know, which is kind of, you know, concerned about how we actually interact with each other. I mean, this personal question around communication seems to be like a direct kind of response to, or way of addressing the impacts of you know, a kind of hyper technologized world, and how we actually deal with each other.
Yeah, the question also brought another work of mine into my mind, which actually, it was like a stitched image of a landscape in a region where you have very nice echoes, and you could shout into the image, and there was a microphone, and then there was just the audio connection between the image that was showing the countryside and the actual space, and there was a live audio connection, which is nothing else than what we are doing here right now, and people were doing in the 50s with their telephones. And at the same time, once you bring this very simple everyday technology into a new context, it suddenly makes you realize what actually this technology does for us, that there is some kind of magical things, like you said, Katherine, your mother's talking with people all around the world. I mean, that sentence a couple of decades ago would have meant that she's mental or something like that, but now everybody knows that that it's actually possible, and we kind of adapt to this magical world in a way that we start taking it as usual, like a real everyday world. And I think that is also interesting in terms of this virus again, that we realize that there's still this gap or difference between a technologized conversation or something like that, and the actual physical conversation. And I think what I feel not very comfortable with often is that technology is sold as something that could replace reality, but it's always just good when it's adding something to reality. And I think that's a mistake people often do, like seeing it as an alternative, but I think it's just an addition to our world. And yeah.
George, last words from you.
I think the impact on the human side, we covered a little bit already. Like there is definitely positive side. That like as an immigrant, I can connect to my family, to Hong Kong, or friends, to people. I mean, connected people together. Like I mentioned before, there's instant available of expansion of knowledge for research and all kind of thing. We see way more things because of the connectivity. But also, I mean, to go back to talk about the research I did the last few years, the darker side of it, right? The polarization of it that it could create, you see in the political front, right? The enhancement, this thing about all this conspiracy theory, also like there is negative side of it. And I think we have to be very careful how to address it. But also there's another thing, we go back to the connectivity questions, is the speed, because it's so fast, the news cycle, it came in. So the time to process is very short and the time to response is very short. So when people don't have that defense mechanism or understanding, so we kind of like fall back to that instant spontaneous reaction. Constantly is, that's why I often did that, the spontaneous reaction is very polarized. And that's how I think the speed has to do with a part of it. And then maybe to go on the second questions about the environment, that's actually very interesting because last year I did a project on about the environment of connectivity, internet and the environment, because we in front of the screen, we click, we buy, or we do things, but we didn't see the server, they call it the cloud, but the cloud actually is not like a cube floating cloud. It's huge mega structure with machines and computers, servers and cables. And I think the tech, I was reading about the tech giant, all this structure, the carbon footprint is as much as the aviation industry. Think about just the transportation, and then Amazon building warehouse according to the location of the city. So it also changed the urban structure and the delivery system and stuff like that. So, and when you buy stuff digitally online, right, think about, you click the raw material, came from petroleum. You go to China to manufacturing, and then ship through the oceans with huge cargo ship that impacted in the marine animals or anything in the shipping around the world. And then trucks going around the cities, different parts, especially in North America and Europe. So actually involve a lot of hardware. So it's actually quite big, the environment nature. Like digital, it's not just simple, I click, I buy something. So if you really think about what's behind each time you click, you buy something, actually there's a lot of hardware and carbon footprint involved. So the way to look at this is the way to, how do we reduce it, right? When we using it day to day, nobody's able to escape from it. Right now is, I mean, for the moment when we don't have the absolute answers, probably have to do a little bit less. But maybe the way is like, moving forward is how, I don't know whether the offsetting, the green offsetting thing makes sense or not. I've been pondering about it too, but we're not going to go back to not connect, right? But moving forward, this is still an unknown question, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that we're able to do this conversation now, I mean, the irony is not lost on me, right? And, throughout, it's like, thank God we have the internet, we're like completely poised in this way for those of us who have access, of course, to be able to have still that opportunity to connect. I would love to continue this conversation, and I'm sure we will in some way through space and time. But I just want to thank you all for, sharing this time with us, for your participation in the exhibition, and for sharing your insights. Thanks also to my colleagues, to Mireille Machard and Claudia Guerra and Kim Tsui for helping with this event, and to Ars Electronica for the invitation. And finally, thanks to all you for joining us today.